Hello, and welcome to episode 39 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I'm your co-host, Sam, here with my other co-host, Sean. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Samuel, how are you?
Doing well. Had a busy weekend. We are now ensconced in our new home. My podcasting location has changed from a high-ceilinged, airy top floor to a relatively cramped basement, but you got to roll with the punches. Tis life.
Yes, you have been outcast to the basement.
It's okay. It's the price of having a child. They get a room.
I mean, I think she'd be okay if you...
In the basement.
Well, yeah, in the basement. If you ran your podcast from her room, I think she'd be okay with that.
True.
Because at this point, she really doesn't. She doesn't know anything, so she doesn't know.
She doesn't, but she is making a lot of vocalizations. We are getting a lot of goo goo gaga, bibbity babble type stuff, which is fun because pretty soon she'll be laughing, which is great.
The Baby Laugh Watch 2023.
Stick around, folks. That's what you come here for. Baby laughs.
Do you have any banter you want to do about any miscellaneous topics before this one? Usually, the last couple we've kind of had a couple things that we wanted to chat about. I don't have anything for this one. I
do have something, and as it was happening, I said this is going to be fun to bring up on the podcast. So, Haley and I have moved. As a part of this move, we decided to get rid of cable, so we are officially cord cutters. We have the internet, we have a smart TV, so we'll get access to all of our various streaming apps. The house that we bought has a digital antenna. Sean, are you hip to digital broadcast?
No, I stream, baby.
Okay, so obviously everybody knows about streaming and everybody knows about cable. Did you ever have rabbit ears growing up as a kid where you would watch local TV with the signal received on an antenna?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Okay, so this house has that. And that came the digital antenna, the modern version of rabbit ears. In Detroit, we get something like 18 channels, I believe. You get the big four, and then a bunch of random, very low quality, and by low quality, I mean it's low definition B movies and old syndicated TV shows, and a channel called Buzzer, which is all game shows, and not modern game shows, but old game shows. And so just randomly, I was watching To Tell the Truth. Are you familiar with To Tell the Truth, the premise of the show?
Well, it sounds familiar, the show does, but I don't remember ever watching it, and I could not tell you what the show was.
Okay, so there are 4 or 5 panelists who are usually minor celebrities. And then there are 3 guests, and one of the guests has done something of note, although they're not a famous person. So the episode that I watched, it was one of the first female astronaut candidates, and there are usually 2 guests per show. And the other guest was a primate researcher who was experimenting on or evaluating chimpanzee brains and cognitive development. So interesting, but not very famous. So the idea is that you have one real person whose biography it is that the show kind of explains to the audience and to the panelists, and then 2 actors or 2 people pretending to be that person. And the celebrity panel interrogates the 3 guests and then tries to identify who the real person is. Anyway, so I was watching just one of these random episodes. I can't remember. We were just tired from a day of unpacking, and this is what was on. And one of the celebrity panelists was Orson Bean. Does that name ring a bell to you, Sean?
It rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you who or what this person does.
He was the voice of Bilbo Baggins in the animated Hobbit movie.
Oh, that's right.
Which
yes.
Obviously we've talked about and highly recommend to everybody. So it was really weird to hear Orson Bean, whose voice I've only ever associated with Bilbo Baggins. Like, I could close my eyes and it was Bilbo Baggins showing up on this game show from the 70s. Anyway, so that's my one little nerdy anecdote, is Orson Bean, the voice of Bilbo Baggins, random appearance on a game show from the 70s.
Sam, I had no idea where you were going with that beginning of this story.
Brought it full circle.
But, I'm surprised you actually had a nice little nerdy tidbit there.
Brought it on home.
So I'm proud of you. That was great.
Thank you. But let's jump into the real reason that we're here. Enough with the quail sauce. Give me the meat and give it to me raw, Sean. Yep. We're here to talk about the second half of season 2 of The Witcher. We're going to do a more in-depth discussion. Sean, you recently rewatched the season, so these episodes are fresh in your mind.
As of about 5 minutes before we started recording.
That's it, folks.
Yeah.
Hot off the presses. Fresh, steaming takes coming from Sean. All right, let's jump in with episode 5 of season 2, titled Turn Your Back. Rience, a fire mage, is freed from prison and tasked to find Ciri by the sorceress Lydia, who is serving an unknown master. Geralt and Istrid travel to the fallen monolith outside Sintra. Yennefer, having disembarked from the ship, rescues Jaskier from Rience. They are then separated and captured by city guards. Vesemir reveals his plan to create new Witchers to Ciri. Ciri agrees, but insists on being the first candidate. Investigating the ruins of the monolith, Geralt and Istrid hypothesize that the monoliths are gateways that, when activated, allow monsters to enter their world. Geralt learns from Istrid and that Yennefer is alive. Triss, attempting to dissuade Ciri, conducts a ritual in hopes of discovering Ciri's source of power. They uncover Ithlien's prophecy, which predicts that a child of the Elder Blood will destroy the world. Ciri's powers activate the Sintra monolith, causing a Chernobog to appear, which then flies away. Geralt ports back to Kaer Morhen, stopping Ciri from taking part in the conversion. Cahir arrives at Sintra. Yennefer summons the Deathless Mother and disappears. She is tasked with delivering Ciri to a location outside Sintra. Sean, what did you think of episode 5, season 2 of The Witcher?
There is just so much fucking going on that each of these little plot lines, it's hard to keep track of. And I just wrote down a couple. You have Witcher mutagen, Yennefer, no magic hag.
Yep.
Then there's references to the Wild Hunt. You have stuff about the prophecy, mutating monsters, Cahir, and then Sintra. Like all of these different things are going on in this one episode.
And Rience. And we're meeting new characters.
Yeah.
In the middle of the season.
It opens with Rience is how I pronounce it. But
the thing is, isn't in the books his name is like Rials?
No, I think it's like Rience.
Okay.
Yeah. But
either way, I try not on my way to not pronounce a single name the same way each time I read it.
But
anyway,
there's just too much going on. Every time they covered a little thing, I'm like, focus on fewer things and do them better instead of trying to shoehorn all of these different plot lines in. And then you have the plot lines that they created that are like lasting throughout the entire season that they don't need. And they're taking relatively major plot lines from the books and turning them into like a quarter of an episode or a half of an episode. Like all of the stuff with Neneka, we'll get to it. It's in episode 6, but
well, in this episode, Rience is introduced for the first time. He is introduced in the first chapter of Blood of Elves as the if not the main villain, at least the heavy, right? That entire book is pretty much a cat and mouse game between Geralt and Rience, and it's interesting.
You think he's the bad guy?
You do, yeah. You do, and then it's at the very end when you get a hint that there is some, how do they say it here, an unknown master kind of behind the scenes, right? And I mean, and there's, so yes, the existing plot lines are suppressed in favor of these inventions of the show writers that, you're trying to cram way too much into one episode. And I think maybe this is also the beginning of the kind of traveling too much, right? Which that aspect of this gets pretty bad later on in the season. But, we've got people, we, the audience, are jumping around from location to location without really understanding their relationship to one another. And then the characters start moving around. And yeah, you can say that's with portals and whatnot, but you don't get a good sense of the passage of time.
Yeah, and by episode 8, we've established that Yennefer and Geralt go off on their own, but neither of them have the magic to portal. So how do they get back to Kaer Morhen in time? And we'll
get to that.
We'll get to that. But I just wanted to back up. I wanted to back up your point of the travel not make sense. But another thing from episode 5, monsters are apparently made of stone now. Like the obelisk stone is just a part of the monsters, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And then we hit a point with Geralt and Ciri where what's it called? The Chernabog is like completely stone. Like it has very little fleshy parts to it.
So like, how is Geralt's sword? How are they supposed to affect it meaningfully? I mean, it's one of those things where one of the things that makes the Witchers really cool is that they have this deep understanding of monster biology and physiology, which they put to use in fighting them. And I think this is maybe something that we see often in the books through dialogue or through little extracts from in-world encyclopedias or descriptions. And you get a sense that Sapkowski really likes this kind of faux encyclopedia for his created world. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the video games, it manifests in The Witcher and, creating different mutagens and other substances which he can use to fight these monsters effectively. Right. And so
you can create potions if you're going to fight vampires. There's a potion you can create specifically to fight vampires.
Yeah. And so here it's okay. So we have these new monsters coming, and it's all just very, again, unnecessary. You don't need to create a whole new variety of monster in order to do something different. There is a really great scene. I think it's in Blood of Elves with the barge. Do you remember that scene? Where there's a mutated or like a really large, I'm not gonna, it's not a sea monster, but it's like a river monster type thing. And
he's just trying to, Geralt's just trying to get to Oxenfurt or something.
Yeah. And there's this really great dialogue between Geralt and some traveling scientist about what this thing is. And they're postulating how it could have grown to its enormous size. And it's this really interesting, mundane explanation for why this thing is so large. And I don't know I can't recall if there's a final answer, but you don't need a final answer because it's not germane to the plot of the show, the way that the mutated monsters are seemingly related to the main plot and the characters and the stakes of the show. So, that's how you do it, because again, it's about the relationship between the characters and the human drama. The monsters are a sideshow. Anyway, that's probably all I got to say on the Chernabog.
Yeah.
So there is one thing here, which is the summary that we read. The final sentence: Yennefer summons the Deathless Mother and disappears. This is how she escapes custody in
Oxenfurt,
or what town? In Oxenfurt. And then she is tasked with delivering Ciri to a location outside Sintra. Does she know that it's Ciri at that point? Because she's never met Ciri before.
Yeah, at this point, Yennefer doesn't know that she's the child surprise. She figures that out in episode 7 or 8, when she's with Neneka.
Yeah, when they meet at the Temple of Melitele.
Yeah,
or Melitele. Pick your pronunciation.
Yeah. But my biggest problem with the Deathless Mother at this point is why involve her with the obelisks? Like, she just all of a sudden is involved in that whole storyline. And I get they're trying to connect everything, but I don't know, man. Like, I'm just like, why?
They're inventing things so that you can tie them together.
Yeah, but it's like, why do they need to be tied together? Why does the Deathless Mother, who's been locked away in this hut in some like demi-plane, I suppose, why does she all of a sudden have to come back and be like, you know what? Yeah, I want to, spoilers if you've watched the episodes, but why does she all of a sudden want to come back and possess Ciri, break down these obelisks? It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and it also seems like, do we learn that it was Ciri's manifestation during the fall of Sintra that allowed the the Deathless Mother. Okay, we'll talk about this in the episode where the Deathless Mother actually escapes. But let's come back to this topic of how did that exactly happen, and how did we get to the point where she was able to even interact with Fringilla, Francesca, and Yennefer. So let's move on to episode 6, titled "Dear Friend." Why don't you go ahead and summarize that for us?
Geralt takes Ciri outside Kaer Morhen. They're attacked by the Chernabog Geralt encountered at Sintra. Geralt manages to kill the monster, but his horse, Roach, is mortally wounded in the fight. At Kaer Morhen, Vesemir and Triss are ambushed by Rience, who steals the mutagens and escapes. After Geralt gently puts Roach out of her misery, he and Ciri travel to the Temple of Melitele, where Geralt hopes Ciri will learn to control her powers. They meet Yennefer when she arrives shortly after them, and she realizes that Ciri is the key to restoring her own magic, but also knows that Geralt would never allow it. Francesca successfully gives birth to the first full-born elf in years. Cahir reveals to Fringilla that Emir is visiting Sintra. Estrad uncovers a link between Ciri and Lara Dorren, a legendary elven warrior. Yennefer tells Geralt that Jaskier is in trouble and being pursued by the Fire Mage, whom Geralt deduces is looking for Ciri. Rience appears at the temple with the Michelet brothers. Geralt tells Yennefer to take Ciri while he holds off Rience. Yennefer and Ciri lock themselves in a room, and Yennefer teaches Ciri to open a portal. Rience escapes, and Yennefer and Ciri disappear through a portal. Triss tells Tissaia of Ciri's elder blood. Overall thoughts on this one, Sam? General thoughts? We kind of talked about the Chernabog in the last breakdown.
This one, things just move way too quickly. Like if the first episode that we talked about today, episode 5, too much is just jammed in there. This episode covers way too much development in just one episode. So for instance, Yennefer meets Ciri, and then like later that day they have to escape. There's no development of their relationship. It's to the point where Yennefer and Ciri learning how to open a portal because Yennefer told her how to in the 30 seconds they had to escape is, even in a world of magic and destiny and all that, it's just, come on. It beggars belief, even within the fantasy setting. But the big thing is we don't get to see Yennefer struggling with this decision about betraying Geralt. And she has no relationship with Ciri that would then be compromised. And maybe part of this is the writers knowing that if they did actually have a relationship, it would make Yennefer's decision to betray Ciri even worse than it already is. Yeah. But it's still way too much happens in this episode.
And this one episode, if you compare it to the book, Yennefer's the one who brings Ciri to the Temple of Melitele. And Ciri's there for quite a while. And Ciri's at the point where she doesn't want Yennefer to leave her there. So the books develop that relationship pretty strongly. Yeah. And nothing makes sense when you have a storyline and that the books have already created that work really, really well. It's just, why do you have to have Geralt bring her? Why do you take a section of a book and put it down to just like half an episode? Because then we're missing out on the whole plot of Ciri and the little studious kid or whatever his name is. He's mentioned at the very beginning, but Ciri has like a whole storyline with him. And all of it is just like, here you go. We went to go see Neneka. Boom. We're done with that. We're moving on.
Well, and her relationship with that kid whose name I cannot recall, it's kind of the first hinting of her and kind of romance and flirtation, right? And that sets up things that happen to her later on in the book series as she is maturing. Yeah, the relationship with Yennefer really becomes like a mother-daughter relationship of closeness that there's no possible way we could get in this episode. And then this is a relatively minor thing. This episode ends with the fight between Geralt and the Michelet or the Michelet brothers and Rience. Why do they even give the Michelet brothers a name? They could just be random thugs 1, 2, 3. In the book, there's a whole description of who these guys are and what they do and how and why they should be found to be intimidating. And Geralt still beats them like pretty soundly. But why do they even have names? It's one of those things where
at that point it's just book service to the fans.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, the Michelet brothers. Like but the only interesting thing about them was kind of their backstory. And then I think one of them had like a pretty epic death scene with Philip Einhold, who doesn't even appear in this scene to begin. Like this completely, it's all jumbled from the books. And again, in service of propelling Yennefer down this deathless mother plot. And
yeah, so that's the thing. They have the story, the plot that they created. And I feel like they're just taking little scenes from the books to further their created plot. And it doesn't make sense. Like, if you're going to do that, create an entirely new plot. Don't pull things that don't tie into the thing you created. Because if you've never read the books and you're watching it, I mean, at that point, my mom hadn't read them and she was confused about what was happening, what was going on.
Yeah.
And then even the people who'd read the books were like, I don't even know what's going on. So yeah, the whole creating characters, pulling shit from the books just because you want to say that you're adapting the books, even though that doesn't do anything for the plot, was just a stupid decision. I love the acting. The acting is great. But what you're having them act isn't doing any service to who you have in these roles.
Yeah, it's a shame because you spend all this money to get the actors and get the sets. Like the temple is cool, the fight scene with Geralt and the Michelet brothers and Rience is good, but it didn't happen in the books like that. It's unclear how things accelerated this quickly. It doesn't have the payoff because of this kind of cat and mouse game that we've been experiencing
because
with Geralt and Rience.
Doesn't the fight take place in like the streets of Oxenfurt?
And it's like it's an ambush. And you get a really cool view into Geralt's abilities as a witcher. Like his senses are heightened before the fight, and he can kind of hear them coming, and he can even tell by their footsteps which ones is Rience and which one's not. And it's preceded by a great scene of Jaskier not interrupting but coming in to find Geralt and this medical student in bed together. And it was just these really interesting character moments. Again, this is I always consider Blood of Elves to be the first book in the official series because it's the first novel. Do you have a different take on that?
No, if you look at the book numberings on the spines, that's book one.
It's book one. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of table setting, right? We're meeting in a lot of ways. It's written as if these characters are. This is who this character is. You get their backstory through flashbacks and through conversation, dialogue, etc. But one of your relatively early introductions is to Geralt, in bed with this medical student, and Jaskier is even like kind of a little jealous, and he's like, "I'm going to write a song about the shape of the outline of her body under the sheets and things like that." So you get these really memorable scenes, and here it's all just jammed in at warp speed.
You have anything else on episode 7 or 6? You want to move on to episode 7?
I guess the final thing is we get another kind of lore injection with the Laura Doran reference.
Laura Dern.
Sorry. Okay. Oh, here's the thing.
Laura Doran. That random cameo where Laura Dern appears.
I don't know why Laura Dern was there. You got Laura Doran, Laura Dern, and then Lorna Doone, the cookie brand, which I really like. And then Brigadoon, the musical, the Laura Doran injection. It's just another bit of lore that is supposed to, all the, look at the deep lore of this and how everything, it's destiny, it's all this stuff. But it's, to your earlier point, it's just another thing that people already know, but they're butchering it so badly it's barely recognizable. And if you haven't read the books, it's just another name that you now have to fit in this constellation of shit that we're getting over the course of the season.
Episode 7, Voleth Mir. Go for it, Sam.
Yennefer and Ciri portal to the home of the woman who took Ciri in and discover the family was murdered by Rience. Meanwhile, Geralt frees Jaskier from prison. Jaskier tells him about Yennefer's lost magic and her muttered incantation. Recognizing the incantation, Geralt realizes Yennefer is in league with Voleth Mir, the Deathless Mother, a demon that feeds on pain. The birth of Francesca's baby causes the elves to focus on rebuilding instead of fighting for Nilfgaard. Frustrated by her slipping grasp on power, Fringilla assassinates 4 of the White Flame's generals and intimidates Cahir into vouching for her to the Emperor. Tissaia tells Vilgefortz about Ciri betraying Triss. Dara quits spying for Dijkstra. Ciri inadvertently reads Yennefer's mind and sees her betrayal. Upset, she has an outburst that alerts a nearby Nilfgaardian patrol, but Geralt and Jaskier, aided by Yarp and Zigrin's dwarven crew, arrive in time to defeat them. Geralt draws his blade on Yennefer, while Yarpen and Jaskier take Ciri to Keir Morhen. Yennefer recites the incantation. In the castle, Francesca awakens to find her baby murdered. Her outburst of pain gives Voleth Mir the strength to break free. Geralt and Yennefer arrive as it escapes the hut. That is episode 7. Another whirlwind of activity.
So here's where, if they wouldn't have butchered so many other things, this is where their created plot begins to become a little enjoyable, where you have the storyline of 3 mages pretty much sell their souls, get everything that they want. They're tricked into this agreement. And all they have to do when you're looking at Francesca and Fringilla, all they have to do is work together. But then human nature makes them become more self-centered, and that leads to them losing out on everything they want. Because if Francesca and Fringilla work together, elves are going to be a part of the army. Fringilla has no problems. She has control and then can solidify power. The whole reason all of this falls apart is because they become self-centered and decide not to work together between the 2 of them. And that causes the pain of having your child murdered, leading to the eventual release of this demon into the world. But for the little that I liked about this plot line that they created, everything else doesn't make up for it up to this point.
Yeah.
And then you get other things like Tissaia and Vilgefortz being in a relationship. I don't recall that being in the books.
No, that's not in the books. I mean, I think I said this when we first talked about the Voleth Mir. I like the idea of Voleth Mir, the hag, the demon that feeds on pain, making these deals. It's really great drama, good people with good intentions or in desperate situations make these deals, and then it sows these seeds of sorrow that are, that bear fruit later on. But that's not the only thing that's going on. There's all these other things going on. So you don't get to really enjoy the drama. You just get these kind of like manufactured conflicts. Like you said, to me, the whole like elves focusing on rebuilding instead of training to fight because of the baby, like that's again something that I needed more than one scene of people saying that was happening, right? Like, show me the elves actually rebuilding instead of fighting. And like, you could also say, like, why wouldn't the elves want to fight even more now to protect their future, right? It doesn't make a ton of sense.
And one baby that was born out of a deal with a demon, like, that doesn't mean that you're able to just reproduce.
Yeah. One baby a future does not make.
Yeah, it's not like Filavandrel and Francesca naturally had a baby.
Yeah.
This is a demon baby. Like,
I mean, it would make more sense if you're like, oh, the elves didn't show up to training today because they were all trying to conceive. Like, that's not what we have. We just, like, they're rebuilding. Their rebuilding looks a lot like lazing around. Like, it's just building is Filavandrel lying in bed looking at his kid. Also, he's the king of the elves. He could probably justify looking at the baby. Are all the other elves sitting in the hallway waiting to come look at the baby?
Yeah.
That to me is a little thin. What else?
There's one thing I missed, and maybe it was detailed pretty well, and I just wasn't paying attention. But how did Geralt know where to find Jaskier? Do you recall? Because in episode 7, he just all of a sudden shows up in Oxenfurt and then saves Jaskier in prison.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things. Did Yennefer tell him that she rescued Jaskier, but then they were caught? She escaped?
No, she doesn't know that he got arrested because she boofed while he was looking in on her, and then he got arrested.
Oh, you're right.
So how does Geralt all of a sudden show up in Oxenfurt and be like, I'm here to save you. I need your help.
I mean, I don't know why we have to explain the screenwriter's mistake or explain away the screenwriter's mistakes. I would say off screen, Yennefer told Geralt she last saw Jaskier in Oxenfurt and they were fugitives. So maybe the cops got him. I don't know. But
it didn't make sense at all. That's why I wrote it down.
No, you're right. It doesn't make sense. It's also a really easy thing to explain away through the type of dialogue that I just said. And I think this is the episode where some of the travel logistics just become a little too cute. Like Geralt and Jaskier and Yarpen Zigrin just happen to be nearby enough to save the day when Ciri and Yennefer run into some Nilfgaards.
Another shoehorned plotline, because you have the whole story of Geralt and Ciri going on a mini adventure with Yarpen Zigrin and the dwarves. In the books, it happens.
Yeah,
so then why do you need to all of a sudden just include Yarpen Zigrin for half an episode? Again, they're just taking little bits and just dropping it into their manufactured plot that they don't need to be there because they don't make sense.
I mean, the Ciri and Geralt traveling with Yarpen and his band is a really great series of events because it demonstrates the relationship between Geralt and Ciri. It shows Geralt kind of being a foster father and teaching her things. It also gives us this context for the political situation because the whole reason that this convoy is even traveling is because of the square tail and the kind of machinations of the Northern Kings. And then I think this is where we do get Laura Doran introduced right at one point with they kind of go off the path and they find these elven ruins where there's the special flower growing, and it's shortly after that I think where there's an attack, and it was so the climax of that entire little mini arc with the convoy is very emotional because you've got dwarves and gnomes fighting other dwarves and gnomes who are part of the square tail. You get kind of Ciri seeing the harsh reality of the world after kind of going through some of these other lessons with Geralt. And then you see that it was all a ploy, right? They were transporting rocks or whatever. They just the king wanted to test the loyalty of Yarpen Zigrin. But here, they just show up to save the day. I think they get 3 lines and Nilfgaardian guy gets an axe to the face and that's it.
Yep, cool little fight scene. Then they're done. They take Ciri to Kaer Morhen and then they're not even there for the climax of the season.
You think they would have hung out for a second.
Yeah, also, thanks guys.
Apparently, Kaer Morhen is simultaneously a secret fortress for the Witchers and also everybody knows how to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my last things is just my complaint about Yennefer's storyline. We go from season 1 from her wanting a child so badly, and then season 2, she's willing to sacrifice a child that she knows is Geralt's basically daughter just to get her powers back.
Okay.
Go for it.
Going back to the Yennefer, how was it exactly that Volethmir was able to interact with Francesca, Fringilla, and Yennefer in the first place? Because in this episode, we kind of get we do get the culmination of their deal with Volethmir, which is Volethmir being freed and escaping.
Mm-hmm.
Is it at all, was their ability to interact with her at all connected to Ciri's powers awakening and the monoliths kind of weakening the nature of the world? So I guess it's
they never explain it because they all just have visions and dreams of this cloaked figure. That's it.
Yeah, so theoretically, Volethmir could just lure through visions and dreams any random 3 people to make this deal. I think the idea is that Volethmir chose them because they were mages, and through the mages would have access to more power and more pain and more punishment, things like that. I mean, that kind of makes sense. And I guess they again, but it's another one of those things where it's like this is where you would kind of want it to be. Like you would want the screenwriters to get a little cute with it and be like, oh, it was only because Ciri's powers awakened that the connection between worlds was weakened, and now this demon can send her thoughts out into our world. And it's, and if it just happens to be these three powerful mages, like I'll take that coincidence because they were wandering around in the woods, whatever. But you get no reason, you get no explanation about how this thing that was trapped for hundreds or thousands of years all of a sudden can start messing with people's brains. Anyway.
Preach.
That's it. Episode 8. Family.
Episode 8 is called Family. A possessed Ciri begins killing witchers at Kaer Morhen. Volethmir also uses Ciri's power to uncover a monolith hidden in the hall. In the ensuing battle, Geralt and Vesemir attempt to contain Ciri. After apologizing to Ciri, Yennefer offers herself up as a host for Volethmir, freeing the princess from its control. Ciri transports Geralt and Yennefer to an unknown world where Volethmir leaves Yennefer's body. Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer glimpse the Wild Hunt, who plan to abduct Ciri as Volethmir recreates its body and joins them. After returning to Kaer Morhen, Yennefer finds that her powers have returned. Geralt realizes Ciri cannot stay at Kaer Morhen. Deducing that Vesemir is after Ciri, the Brotherhood and the remaining northern monarchs put a bounty on Ciri and her protectors. Blaming the Northern Kingdom for the loss of her newborn, Francesca kills human babies in Redania. Istrid tells her of Ciri's elder blood, and she realizes the girl is the elves' only hope to rebuild their society. Emperor Emir arrives at Sintra and reveals that he had Francesca's newborn killed. He orders Fringilla and Cahir arrested for lying to him and is further revealed to be Ciri's father, Dooney. Episode 8. Now, the vast majority of this is the fight at Kaer Morhen.
Yeah.
And they kind of, in this recap, put it into one sentence. So a whole bunch of other stuff happens.
Well, to be fair, a lot of that fight was just like, how are they still fighting? Like, how? What? Either these things would have destroyed them in the time that it takes, or they would have easily dispatched. It's just like those monsters were really dangerous when they needed to be, but then also seemingly completely ineffective whenever there was some dialogue that needed to happen.
Yeah. There was dialogue. Witcher gets his face bitten off.
Yeah.
Dialogue, fighting. Yeah, it was hard to watch at times.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of a monolith being hidden in the tree in the Witcher Hall, like, come on. Like, you don't even need...
So this is where I can kind of see where their created plot was going at the end of episode 8. If Volethmir was just a demon, I would be really annoyed with the whole prospect of Volethmir knowing about the obelisks, knowing that the Witchers at Kaer Morhen have one for some reason. And if she would have just been out for revenge for being trapped for all these centuries, I'd be like, what a great plot line. That's a great story.
Sure, yeah.
But instead, like with this obelisk, it's like, and having Volethmir apparently be one of the Wild Hunt, which is why you don't need to do that. Because, yeah, the Wild Hunt are different. They're not. There's so much more would need to go into that. Well, we would be ruining so many other things, but just including that as the Volethmir was just randomly a Wild Hunt member it's hard to get my mind around.
Can we say that the rest of the Wild Hunt, at least in the book canon, they are not beings of they're not demonic entities. Correct. They are like otherworldly in the sense that they literally come from a different planet. Is that fair to say?
Different plane.
Different plane. Yeah.
Like they describe it as the conjunction of spheres. So different like realities all coming into one.
Yeah.
And the Wild Hunt are pretty much just elves that live on a different plane. So now you're changing the lore behind the Wild Hunt and making them out to be demons. So whatever.
I mean, it's also one of those things where, and this is how like this is why you really need to know what you're doing when you adapt a novel. Because novels, especially ones like the Witcher, where there's this insertion of all this in-universe material that provides this backstory. At the beginning of chapters, there'll be an excerpt from an encyclopedia or an excerpt from a mage's memoirs or an excerpt from a specific report that a Nilfgaardian soldier wrote to his commander. It's all these things that you get around the need to have whatever information that you want to transmit to the audience delivered via dialogue. Because you couldn't just open an episode with somebody reading from a book on like a blank screen and then the dialogue begins. You can do that in the book. So if you're going to take things like the Wild Hunt, which are seemingly important, otherwise, why did they show up in the climax of this entire season? There's not nearly enough setup. In the books, this would have been set up at multiple points throughout in different characters. You'd get multiple perspectives on it. And here it's just one of those things where I think there was a throwaway line in season 1, right? The riders of Morhag were seen over the straits of Skelt. Like, right? No explanation. Nobody in the universe ever says the riders of Morhag and the Wild Hunt are the same thing, at least that I can recall. Mm-hmm. So here you get first of all, then you seemingly change the Wild Hunt by having Volethmir join them. But then you also don't know why that is or isn't important, because we don't know what the Wild Hunt actually is or the threat that they pose. Anyway, off soapbox rant.
Yeah.
Over. Continue with Sean, your reaction to episode 8.
I just don't know what else I want to say about this. It's just you have the fallout of the revelation that Dooney is Emir, the Emperor of Nilfgaard, which is straight from the books. So, I mean, no complaint there. That just is what it is. You have Francesca all of a sudden going like full Old Testament and is killing babies. And
which is like, correct me if I'm wrong, this was the town where just a few episodes earlier, you had armed soldiers patrolling around, rounding up elves, correct?
This is Redania, so not necessarily.
Okay,
this is where Dijkstra hangs out in King Vizimir.
Okay, so little note to
not friendly to elves at all.
Yeah, that's so you have another place. So it's not, the point is, from what you're saying, it's not Oxenfurt where we were earlier.
Yeah.
So it is medieval town number 2 that looks basically the same as medieval town number 1.
Yep. We've only been here in the king's chambers up to this point.
Right. So we've never actually been on the streets before. So if we're thinking of, they're on the streets of a town, the only other time I've seen the streets of a town is in what we can say now is a completely different location. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say this is because it seems like they were just walking around during the middle of the day, killing babies, very obviously being elves, and we have no reason to think that they would be allowed to. There's no explanation for why they are allowed to just do that
and just keep walking around.
Right? Yeah, and forget the whole killing babies thing. Like that in and of itself is going to. I mean, I question anybody who says, here's our plan. We're going to walk around during the daytime in the open streets. Then we're going to kill a bunch of babies simultaneously in front of their parents. And then we're just going to continue walking at a leisurely pace through the rest of the town as very obviously as elves. Compare this to, in the book, what they're trying to kind of mimic is the elven insurgency of the Squaretails, right? Mm-hmm. And I call them Squaretails. I think they call them squirrels.
I call them Scoia'tael.
Scoia'tael is the actual elven name for them, right? They go out of their way to demonstrate how those are very effective guerrilla fighters. They use the woods. They hide with the population. They play on the fears of the non-humans about the human oppression. They make alliances with Nilfgaard. There's a very specific infiltration of an event that is probably going to happen in episode 3 that we'll probably see in in season 3 upcoming. They're not wandering around in the middle of a city in the middle of a day killing babies. Mm-hmm. It's so ham-handed. Like, you didn't even need to do that this season, right? It's kind of almost shoehorned in.
Yeah, like all of this shit
Yeah,
from the
like
books.
this you could have easily done with a flashback or like a nightmare. You could remind the audience of Francesca's loss and that pain in a different scene, and then that can be like her motivation for the entire season instead of ending this season with her doing this, because she already reached a low point with the death of her baby, which then freed Volethmir. Like, boom, concluded. Pick that up in season 3. That can be your entry into the Squire plot line and the like continuing alliance between the elves and Nilfgaard.
Yeah, show the Scoia'tael like raiding travelers on like a street, and then you can do the flashback to her losing her child then. But yeah, you didn't need to include it in this action-packed final episode.
Okay, question for you. How does the Brotherhood and the Northern Monarchs, how do they deduce that Vizimir is after Ciri?
I think there's a reference in Dijkstra's spy rings.
Okay.
And that's such an easy way to explain away so many different things that Dijkstra just knows, has people everywhere, knows what's going on. But and I buy it because that's his character and that's how the books kind of make him out, that he has people everywhere. So yeah, I mean, that's how I came across it.
Okay. Yeah. Josiah has a role in that, right? Where she's the one who suggests putting the bounty on Ciri's protectors. Did I recall that correctly?
I believe so. Yeah,
which is a
council.
Which is a complete deviation from Josiah in the books, who doesn't Josiah kind of prepare for Ciri to be accepted into Aretuza?
Well, Tissaya's whole thing in the books is that all she wants to do is just further the school, like Aretuza, and then realizes that she's been played by all of these different political factions, and then Aretuza is like destroyed.
Yeah.
And that's her whole shtick in the story. So we're kind of coming to the end of Tissaya's storyline here in the next, probably by the end of this season. Yeah. Season 3.
Yes. Theoretically, Tissaya wasn't really a politician. Like the whole Vilgefortz thing was invented for the show, right? I think I kind of see where that's going, because you want to have them, if you establish that they're attached to one another, and if it's romantic or if it's
his betrayal means so much more.
Yeah. So I don't know. I thought that was another one of those things where in the book they did it really well. You had all of these kind of puzzle pieces that fell into place at the end of Blood of Elves to set up the scene that they're mimicking. And you didn't have it because it's kind of like The Rise of Skywalker. I know we're not talking about Star Wars. We haven't talked about Star Wars, but I think after that, The Rise of Skywalker came out, you and I were texting about it, that like there were 8 different things in that movie that I really would have liked to have seen developed. But the problem was, instead of spreading it out over a trilogy, you put it all into one movie. So it's a non-stop, 2.5 hour thrill ride where nothing can really sit. And here they hit these major plot points, but there's not nearly enough rising action to justify them. Instead, you get all these distractions and lore dumps and things that are supposed to be important, but there's no reason that the audience should actually know that they're important. They're just kind of presented in an important way. Anyway.
All I can say is I hope season 3 gets better. And we are 3 days away from our first episode of season 3. Any last culminating thoughts on season 2 besides that it was very disappointing?
It was very disappointing. I think even more so in retrospect, now that I think it's pretty clear that it was largely season 2 that led to Henry Cavill leaving the series, either directly because of season 2 or because of the conflict that emerged as season 2 was developing between Henry Cavill and the screenwriters. And I think Lauren Hissrich has gone down on record saying that season 3 will be more faithful to the books. So we will see. We will be the judge of that. A Time of Contempt is the book that would largely correspond with season 3, and it's pretty cool. lot of interesting, fun, dramatic stuff happens, and we will see if they can do it justice.
Season 3 coming soon, everybody. For us, that's it for season 2. You can follow us at Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things on Facebook. You can email us at elvesringsandnerdythings@gmail.com. You can follow us on everywhere where you can get a spot. You can follow us everywhere where you get a podcast. Spotify, Apple. Those are our 2 most popular. Sam, anything else before we say bye?
That is all I got. If you get a chance, Buzzer. Classic game shows from the 70s. Maybe you'll see Orson Bean questioning a female astronaut.
You heard it here, folks. Find Orson Bean on Buzzer. Right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.